My husband, he's Chinese. I told everyone that I am not going to change my husband's name. I do not want to be stuck in a relationship which is going to constrict me, which is going to be toxic for me, which is going to strip away my identity.
A friend of mine also told me like a few years ago, don't marry a Pakistani guy. And I was really annoyed when he said that because I was like, I hate marriage. And do you think white people are better than brown people? They're all misogynist. Why do I need a man at all? This was like the liberal feminist take. If you're a woman, you don't need a man anymore. And I feel like that's where we kind of got it wrong.
Marriage is something that you want. It shouldn't be something that you need.
What are some barriers in marrying someone from a different culture? I'm sure it comes with its territory. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
I'm really excited for this conversation because this is a conversation, like I mentioned, that in a lot of ways I would relate with because I'm in a situation like that at the moment, like an interracial marriage. But before we go on, I just want to introduce you to my audience. Your name is Tayyaba and you're a journalist living in the UK. You're from Pakistan. You used to be an anchor there, right?
Yes. A
This
news
is pretty
presenter for 5
incredible.
years.
This is pretty incredible because I don't know a lot of news presenters from Pakistan who are actually women, who actually work for Pakistani media, like public media. Or did you work at in the private media?
No, I did work in public media. I worked in the state television of Pakistan, which is PTV World. Unfortunately, there was only one English channel in Pakistan, so I had no other choice. But I was pretty happy with my experience over there.
Right. That's incredible. And then you came to the UK to study. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes. I came here for a year to study politics and communication, which is a part of the media and communication department at LSE. I wanted to come at LSE because number one, it's one of the best universities. Number two, in media and comms, it was the top second in the world. And number two, I really wanted to live the London life and have the London experience and the LSE experience because it's a little leftist sort of university. So I'm really happy here because there are a lot of people whose opinions and suggestions that they give sometimes and the discussions, they're very authentic and they're not exactly leaning towards right, which is something I enjoy. But yeah, I have to go back because I'm a Achieving Scholar. So after a year, I'd go back.
When is the year up?
It is, I think, September 2025. But if my dissertation does not complete, which I'm pretty sure it won't, maybe October or November.
Right. Okay. So this is an incredible story. Like you were working in Pakistan, then you moved abroad for your masters, and in between all of this, you got married, I think,
Yes.
and
Before I moved abroad, yes.
you're currently like living away from your husband, right?
Yes, long distance.
That's a topic for another podcast. How is it working out? But I just
It's good. It's good. I think marriage is always a work in progress, so you just have to make it work. It's just a commitment, and that's what you have to stay committed to, I guess.
right. I just want to say to whoever's listening or watching, and wherever they are listening or watching, before we go and get into the juicier details of how it happens to marry someone from a different culture, please like or subscribe or follow if the content resonates with you. And if you have feedback, you're welcome to write to me. Just don't troll me. That's just one thing, I don't respond to trolls. But so you're Pakistani. Where's your husband from? And how did
My
the story
husband
start?
Okay, so my husband, he's Chinese and he's not a journalist. He's not in media because many people thought that he was in media, which is how we met. But no, that's not the case. He's actually in the IT field, which is very different. He studied electrical engineering, came into the IT field, was in a management position. And that's probably how we met. I was a master of ceremony for a lot of events as a freelancer back in Pakistan while I was working at PTV. So I got a lot of offers from really good organizations, the UN, presidency, Prime Minister House, etc., etc. So a friend of mine actually recommended me for this Chinese company's event. They weren't paying a lot, but I took it because it was my friend's recommendation, so she wanted me to take it. She couldn't do it. She was going abroad. So I did. And I met this girl who was the admin over there. I became really good friends with her. And he was not, my husband was not there in the first event. But after a couple of months, they had another event and they asked me to be a master of ceremony again. It was a couple of months later. And at that time, somehow I had decided that I will get married because I went to an event before that and there was a little bit of a conference and I realized that it's probably the right time. That's when I decided. And only a week after that I had this event and my friend told me that my husband was interested, my now husband was interested in me, and I ignored it because he was Chinese, he was not a Muslim, and there was this one requirement from my family that was that my husband has to be a Muslim. He can be from anywhere in the world, but he just has to be a Muslim. So I ignored and I did not really pay heed to it. But then one thing led to another, and now I'm in a long distance with my Chinese husband.
So it's interesting you said that you had decided to get married. Did you just decide, like, did you just make up your mind that you were open to meeting someone?
Yes.
Or, okay. And how did he become interested without meeting you? Like, when did the first meeting happen? How did it happen?
So, firstly, to answer your first question, I did decide to meet people and allow myself to actually think about people in a certain way, in the way of future husband, because my family had been pushing me to get married for a very long time, for about 4, 5, 6 years, and I was just somehow escaping it. I did not want to get married. I told them that I'll be single for the rest of my life because I enjoyed singlehood. It's beautiful, it's amazing. So, all the single girls out there, it's okay. You're great. You're doing great. You have no idea. But I decided to get married because of the prenatal conference that I attended. And I realized that before 35, I might want to have a child because it's better for their health and my health as well. So that's when I decided that, okay, maybe I can, get ready to settle down and maybe I can meet somebody and I would like a friend for life. And that's when I met my husband. I actually had a couple of proposals here and there. My parents were looking for people. I had a couple of proposals coming in from friends, family, relatives, etc. A few friends of mine as well. But I think so. My husband had been in Pakistan for about 4.5 years already, and he was going to leave Pakistan when he met me. He had already signed all the documents to leave Pakistan in about 6 months. So he met me in a meeting that I had before the conference in itself, which I was supposed to host. And that's where he saw me. And I think it was, you could say it was love at first sight. I'm not sure. But I did shake his hand, and he was very surprised that Pakistani women shake hands. And I guess he liked my boldness. I was very bold in the meeting. I was confident. I guess he liked that. I think it's best that I met him when I was in a professional demeanor because that's when I think I am my best version. So he saw all the, you could, some people who would be chauvinistic would call it bossy, but I call it leadership. So he saw those, those characteristics, and that's probably what attracted him. But I thought he was decent. I thought he was great. And when my friend told me that on the next day, when we had the conference, when she told me that he's interested, we had a photo together. It was very random and it was very normal for me because a lot of people used to come to me to have photos because some people had watched me on TV, some people would like the way I presented, etc., etc. So I thought it was just a fanboy moment. But later on, my friend told me that he's actually very interested and he's decent. She can vouch for him. He's never asked for anybody else before that. And I guess I still wasn't really sure. I just said, okay, we'll see about it. And I just, took his number. He asked me to meet a couple of times. We didn't meet. I always made up an excuse because I did not want to waste his time. He was not a Muslim, and I knew that I will never waste somebody else's time because their time is as valuable as mine. And this is a very big commitment, converting your religion for somebody. This is a this is a topic I never wanted to bring up because it's very hard to lose a part of your identity. And religion, your belief system, is a very strong part of your identity. So I
Yeah.
never wanted to bring this conversation. Probably wanted to avoid it as well. But he's smart. He's amazing. he used to watch my news and bring up topics about the world affairs and geopolitics. And I was really interested in that and really interested in discussing it and talking about it. So we would have good conversations, intellectual conversations. And that's how I was like, okay, this guy is smart. He's pretty smart. And but I still never really thought of him more than a friend in the beginning, I guess.
Right. And you said that he wasn't a Muslim and you didn't want to bring up this conversation. Was it also equally important for you, as much as your family, that your partner is a Muslim?
Okay, so honestly, yes, because I had no issue with the person's ideals, ideology, etc. But since I am a practicing Muslim, I would call myself a moderate Muslim, if you say that. Um, but the thing is that even though I don't really offer my prayers daily, I don't really offer all the rituals as probably a Muslim would or should, but I still have a very good connection, a very strong connection with Allah Ta'ala. And I did want my husband to be a Muslim, even though sometimes I would question this, that why are men allowed to marry women of Jewish or Christian religion, but women aren't? But despite the question that used to arise in my mind, and this was a lot before I married my husband, I had this question and somehow it never really got answered. Many people tried to answer, give justifications, give explanations, but somehow it didn't really ever sit with me. But I did follow the religion and I knew that this was a compulsion. So I was very well aware that I will follow the compulsion that has been given on me.
Let's fast forward it to the time you guys actually started seeing each other. How soon did this conversation come up? And how soon did you start realizing this could actually be a prospect, marrying someone from a different faith, from a completely different culture?
That came a lot more earlier than the conversation started happening, because since he did come with the intention and he was very clear with the intention that I'm here, I'm bringing a proposal to get married and not just to wait and see, wait and watch where it goes, not to just date for a very long time. And honestly, I thought it worked well for me because I did not want to waste my time, I did not want to waste his time, and I did not want to date for years or months and then figure out what happens. I'm going to be very vulnerable here, Kaka. The prospect came when I had a panic attack live on TV, and I was reading the news, the 9 p.m. bulletin. It was a primetime bulletin at BTV World. And I was reading it, and suddenly I started feeling palpitations. I had been really stressed out about my career, going up the ladder. And I just started feeling really a lot of palpitations, and I realized that I won't be able to go on, live TV just like that. And I told, after the break, there was a little break. I told the producers, tried to tell them via the screen because I couldn't say anything. And they were very kind. They were very understanding. They did not know what a panic attack was. Even I was very new to the panic attack situation as well. And I just, got up and they were like, we'll manage that. Don't worry about it. So they sent the other anchor. And I just went and I just had shivers and palpitations, etc. So I got a lot of messages asking me if I was okay, if everything was fine, my parents, my friends, and my current husband. And after some time, I realized it was really late. And since nobody could meet me and I wanted to talk it out, when he texted, "Are you available to meet?" I said, okay. And that's when we had a meeting. We met each other and he asked me if everything was okay. And I started ranting in front of him. And I kept going on and on and on about what's happening, how I think my career is not going as well as I would like it to. It's been already 4 years, etc., etc. I broke down in front of him basically. And that's when he did not mansplain anything. He did not provide solutions. He just listened and was there. And I think that's when I knew that if I don't marry this guy, at least I'm going to be best friends with him forever. So I think that's one of the reasons I ended up thinking that he's a very good prospect. We met later on, and I realized he had very strong ideals. So I don't want to bring up the topic of him converting to Islam, and probably I should let the idea go in itself. But then my friend, the one who introduced us, she ended up talking to him. He brought the question of religion. He told me that it's his decision. He's talked to his parents, and they've told him they're okay with it, and it's his decision. And I was like, wow, what happened? What is going on? And it was just, I think, 2 months in, and that's it. And that was very crazy for me because, like, 2 months and somebody is talking to their parents, and we're not even dating officially. We're not even, dating at all, actually. And then I told my dad, and I talked to my dad, and I told him all the prospects that were there. And I told him about my husband as well. And my father talked to me, and he said that, listen, this guy is the one who seems to be compatible with you. He seems to be the one putting enough effort for you, the one that you deserve, and I think you should go with him. You should see what happens. So basically, we both got blessings from our parents before we started dating.
That's a 180-degree from how I experienced it. And I never imagined that somebody would experience it like this, especially given that he's from a different culture and different religion. Did religion come in the conversation between you and your father?
I talked to them, and they said that as long as he converts to Islam, everything's fine. So you can marry. We already had this conversation even before I met my husband as well, and a very open conversation with my parents. I'm very lucky to have such open-minded parents, honestly. And my dad is very open-minded as well, and he is one of the reasons I feel so empowered and was able to take decisions for myself. And the religion question came a lot before I met my husband as well. They said as long as the person is a Muslim, doesn't matter the sect. They could be Ahle Tashin, they could be, um, you know, Ismaili. It doesn't really matter. Nothing matters. What matters is that they're just Muslim. And the rest, they can be from anywhere, from Latin America, from Southeast Asia, from China, from Japan, from Africa, from anywhere. That really doesn't matter. So I think we already had this question. Everybody was very clear. And somehow everybody thought I would marry someone from abroad and not from Pakistan. This was something everyone had an idea about for a very long time because I would just keep bringing this question up, keep bringing this conversation up that I probably won't marry a Pakistani. I have no idea why, but this just happened.
So, this is really interesting you say that people around you already thought that you would not marry a Pakistani guy.
Hmm.
I'm not sure why and based on what people deduce this. A friend of mine also told me like a few years ago, don't marry a Pakistani guy. And I was really annoyed when he said that because I was like, I hate marriage. I don't want to marry anyone. And do you think like white people are better than brown people? Like they're all the
Hmm.
same. They're all misogynists. Like there are misogynists in Denmark and there's misogynists in Norway. And I say Denmark because I used to live there. And at the time I was living in Denmark. So I was like, you think that they're just because they're whiter and more light skinned, do you think that they're better? And he was like, why are you going off on me? I'm just saying that I know you and I feel like you would not be compatible with a Pakistani guy because so much comes with the territory. Now I look back and I feel like what he meant was the whole thing, like the cultural expectation of being a wife or the cultural expectation of being a daughter-in-law in Pakistan, right? And the whole marriage system, the way it's designed and the way it's built, it's so highly patriarchal.
Hmm.
Like you could be you could be working at NASA or you could be a Harvard PhD or you could be working at the UN. But when you're at a family dinner, people are only going to talk about how good of a homemaker you are, how well you can make biryani, and how well you can serve the in laws. That's what he basically was trying to tell me. And I was very dismissive because I was like, I'm never going to get married. Like, why do I need a man at all? And I feel like this whole conversation about I don't need a man at all was also a very prevalent conversation when I was in my mid 20s. Of course, you don't need a man. Like, if you don't need a man, I mean, you shouldn't need a man and you don't need a man. This was like the liberal feminist take. If you're a woman, you don't need a man
Hmm.
anymore. And I feel like that's where we kind of got it wrong. I feel like I wanted to know instead, well, you don't need a man, but maybe you want one at
Yes.
some point in your life, and that's okay.
Hmm.
So you guys are from completely different cultures and people kind of knew you and how you were and they probably assume that you will find someone from a different culture.
Hmm.
What are some barriers in marrying someone from a different culture? Like, I'm sure it comes with its territory. And what is that territory?
Firstly, I'd like to comment on what you've said, and I completely agree, Kakab. Marriage is something that you want. It shouldn't be something that you need. And that's where I drew my line as well. I told my parents, if I find a good guy, if I find a person who is compatible with me, then I will marry. But if I don't, then I don't want to marry. I do not want to be stuck in a relationship which is going to constrict me, which is going to be toxic for me, which is going to strip away my identity and my confidence and my security from me. I think it's a privilege that person wants to be with you rather than needing to be with you, because if somebody wants to be with you, that's a higher level of trust, that's a higher level of understanding, and that's a higher level of love as well. So I do agree that girls, and boys, they should get the idea straight that if they do not want to marry somebody, then they shouldn't. It shouldn't be a necessity. It should be something you do out of your own free will. Having a sort of partner who supports you, it's great because it's like a best friend that you can trust, you can tell everything, you can be vulnerable in front of. You can't really be vulnerable in front of everyone, you know. Some friends, yes, but then they have their own lives too, they have their own careers too. Living with somebody, it's like living with your best friend and having perks of everything. So I do believe that marriage is great, but I do think that it's not a necessity. And if somebody thinks it's not for them, they shouldn't be forced into marrying. But yes, bringing it to the cultural aspect, it is interesting because there are a lot of similarities in culture of Pakistan and South Asia and the Middle East, and also China, because China is very
East
family
Asia.
oriented. East Asia is very family oriented. Probably even Southeast Asia is very family oriented. And they also have certain expectations of daughter in laws. They have certain expectations from their sons after they get married and before they get married as well. And honestly,
Really?
yes, they do. They do. And interestingly, I don't dislike that because I've personally, since we come from South Asia, I personally do have these ideals of a more family oriented setup rather than an individualistic style, liberal style of setup, which is a very Western concept. And I think it's very important to have an indigenous concept. And I believe in the Pakistani concept of familyhood. But yes, there has to be a better alignment of that family in a way that there
Hmm.
isn't interference, but there is reciprocity. So in China, it's
Right.
very similar, honestly. I did not feel much of a shock in terms of the culture in itself, of the familyhood and the family orientation. Interestingly, when my husband, he was marrying me, many of his relatives told his parents, just like many conservative families in Pakistan would do. They told his parents that, oh, your son is marrying somebody from abroad. Oh, she is, she's going to take him away. He's not going to come back to you. She's going to, steal him from you, etc., etc. And that's something that many conservative families in Pakistan also experience, where the son.
That is what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Like that's literally what we hear when a man marries a woman of his choice in our culture. We're like, oh, he's completely gone. Like he's never gonna come back. He's just always gonna be around his in-laws and his wife. And I feel like that is so
Primitive.
divisive. That is so divisive. Like, why
Hmm.
can't you both bring what each of you have to offer and just make something of it and meet each other halfway?
Hmm.
Okay, that's not so different from us,
It's
actually.
actually not very different.
It's
The only thing that I really did feel was a language barrier. That was immense. That was crazy, absolutely shocking for me. But the cultural in itself, cultural aspect, it was not very different. The mother-in-laws have similar expectations as Pakistani mother-in-laws, a lot more
like what?
liberal.
To cook,
Not to
serve,
cook in
clean,
itself, but
have children.
yes, have children. Oh, 100%, 100%. And that's something my husband and I, since we're both young people with much more mature mindset, and a much more, we realize that it's our decision, right? So we've been keeping these questions at bay. But yes, there is an expectation to have children. There are certain expectations of women, of daughter-in-laws, in China as well, in East Asia as well. And that's something I experienced too. So there are a lot of similarities. For instance, the relatives sometimes intervening and interfering, and the relatives talking about, backbiting and stuff.
Right.
That's also somewhat similar
Wow.
sometimes. Yes, I
So
was really shocked how
you probably
similar
don't
it
need to, you needed no training. You were completely
was.
familiar to these concepts.
I
Wow.
was, and it's a good thing I don't know Chinese, so I don't understand what they're saying.
Oh my God,
Right?
yes.
Ignorance is a
Like
blessing.
the privacy that the privacy and freedom that not knowing a language offers is just underrated.
It is.
But before we come to that, you said earlier something about if men and women don't need marriage, they shouldn't go for it. I just wanted to interject, didn't want to interrupt you earlier. And like you told your parents that you will marry someone you want to marry, and if you don't find that someone, then you're not going to marry. I remember something that my mother and I always used to talk about when she used to, obviously my mom and my parents also did their part and like kind of trying to convince me to get married, right? And they would find people for me and I would just simply like refuse to see them. So what used to happen was a lot of times they would find people and they would line stuff up and they would line these, these proposals and this arranged setup, and I would just simply say, well, I don't want to meet this person. Did you like ask me before lining this person up? No. So why should I meet them?
Hmm.
And then they got embarrassed several times because they had to go back and tell people, oh well, she doesn't want to meet, so we're sorry for the whole charade.
Hmm.
And I remember that we had this really heated conversation once where my mother asked me, what is your problem? Like, what is your problem? And I was like, okay, first of all, why does this person want to marry me? And my mother would be like, well, I have no idea. Because that's how it works in arranged setups, right? Like you are just being arranged
Yes.
to meet someone because two families think that now it's time and you've come of age that you should get married. And I told my mother something really simple. I was like, look, you know what? I want to marry someone who wants to marry me. Not just, I don't want to marry someone who just wants to get married to whoever. I want to marry someone who wants to marry me. And this concept was just so difficult for them to understand. She was like, well, how is he ever going to decide to marry you if he doesn't meet you? I was like, no. The person who wants to marry me will meet me and then decide to get married. Not make a random decision, okay, I am ready to get married in December of this year. I'm going to see 5 girls. And this was a huge difference. Like the setup in which, like, I have a really strong position against arranged marriages and I have a really strong position against being arranged. And like I said, I don't want to feed the trolls. If it works for someone, it works for someone, but it just doesn't work with my mindset. I completely understand, like when you said you told your parents, if you find someone you want to marry, you will do it. And I mean, honestly, I thought there was no hope for me because I hated men and I was so critical. But I mean, there's always hope and life can turn around within a matter of days. You could meet someone and it could completely change your opinion on things. It's just about meeting the right person. And I know a lot of women are feeling these days that there's not enough good men in the world.
Hmm.
And that's 100% true, by the way. I completely agree with that. But I feel like you need one. Out of like all the men in the world, if you find one, or if you, I mean, for people who are not straight and they date people of the same sex, if you find one person who you love, this is enough. Like you don't need like a pool of potential candidates, you know what I mean, or suitors. Like having one person is enough. And I think this can change your life, and I realize this now. You said something about culture and language, and I completely agree with that because so my fiance doesn't speak Urdu, right? And sometimes I'm like, thank Christ. He would never really understand the raw conversations that happen, and good for me because sometimes I'm so embarrassed. I'm like, oh my God, like maybe the similarities between Chinese and Pakistani culture are far greater than the similarities between
Yes,
German, or his
I
roots
do
are
think so.
Polish, so he has both the German and the Polish side, and I feel like there's a lot of similarity between Pakistani and Polish
Yeah.
cultures in a lot of ways. But sometimes I'm like, oh my God, we take it so far that I'm really happy he doesn't speak Urdu, and I'm super happy because it's also a thing like when my parents want to do something or they want to control a situation, you always feel more empowered to engineer a situation in your own language. If you constantly have to speak or rely on a second language to do that, you don't do it. So I'm like, oh my god, I'm shielded from so many situations that they would do otherwise, but they don't do it, or like they don't think about it because they don't speak the language. So I can completely understand like that you don't speak Chinese. Do you have any pressure to learn Chinese though? Like, do they have any expectations that you're gonna learn it and be able to speak a few words at least?
Hmm. Honestly, about expectations, I would say that everybody understands how difficult it is to learn a new language, especially when you're much older. Um, But it does come with the sort of question that do you want to learn it yourself? I think I would like to learn Chinese because I would like to understand my husband better because his first language is Chinese. I come from a erstwhile colonial state. So my official language was also English, so it comes naturally to me. And my parents and my teachers never allowed us to speak Urdu at home or at school. We were not allowed. We were fined for speaking Urdu. So English is very natural for us South Asian people. Most of us, not of course all of us. So whatever your first language is, I think that's important to. It's easier to express your opinions. It's easier to feel in that language as well. And I do know that my husband loves poetry. He loves literature, and he understands Chinese and poetic and literature language very well. And Chinese is very hard. Mandarin is very hard.
Mandarin is
And the fact is that since he loves poetry, whenever he wants to tell me something, whenever he wants to explain a literature piece or a piece of poetry with me or share it with me, he can't really do that because unfortunately I wouldn't understand it. And then the language in itself has a lot of metaphors, a lot of idioms that I wouldn't understand. So for that, of course, it's important. And he can't translate that in English because he learned English and he polishes English actually in Pakistan. Because in China, nobody speaks English. It's very hard for them and they're very shy. All the Chinese people that I've
right.
met, and even East Asians, Koreans, and Japanese, they're very shy of speaking in English because they feel that they might mess up. They feel that they wouldn't be able to communicate
Right.
their ideas properly. So
Yeah.
it's difficult for them to communicate. So they end up being introverted. They end up being shy.
Right.
And even if they understand everything, they will not speak to you in English in just to save their honor, just to save their confidence, and not to feel like they're in a vulnerable position. So I completely understand it, and I would like to learn Mandarin, not just because my husband, definitely that's the first priority. Second priority is that I would like to converse with my parents-in-law, my in-laws better.
Right. I was gonna ask if they speak English.
They don't. They don't.
Nice. I mean, saves you from a lot of stuff
Nice.
as well. Like we.
I thought that too, honestly. I thought that too, and it does. I think it does as well, especially in the beginning when the understanding is developing. And there are certain times when you're emotional, you're sensitive to certain things. So I think I have been lucky in that sense. But also, then it brings a lot of. I'm unable to express my opinions across, so I have to rely on a translation tool. I have to rely on my husband, who sometimes filters things out, and I don't want them to be filtered out. So it's very important. And then I rely on translation
I
tools.
like it. Culture filtering it out for cultural appropriation. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But
Yeah.
that's the thing. I think it's important to
Hmm.
learn Chinese. For me, there is a little bit of expectation around it because my parents-in-law cannot speak English, and they're much older, of course, so they do expect that I might learn it someday. But my husband always defends me. He says that why don't you learn English? So
Right.
it's like a two-way situation, and they're trying to learn English as well. But yes, I
Wow.
do
At
want
this
to.
age.
Yes, at this age, yes, they're trying. It's not going very well, but they're trying.
Right. And they live in China, right?
They do, they do.
What city do they live in?
So they live in Henan province, Zhengzhou.
Right. And your husband, where does he live at the moment?
He's in Turkey now. Even when he was young, he didn't really live with his parents a lot. He shifted away from his home when he was only 13, 12, 13, I guess. He lived in a boarding school for a very long time, went to have all of his education outside of his parents, uh, out of his home city, out of his parents' house. So he's been on his own for quite a while, mostly in Beijing.
Right. And so it's really interesting. Like you said, like there are some expectations of being a daughter-in-law in China. What are they like? Just like just to sum it up,
Um,
main stuff.
okay, so honestly, I haven't been to China many times. I've only been there 3 times in the past. I think we met in 2022. We got engaged in November 2022. So since then, it's only been 3 times that I visited. But there are certain expectations that are, communicated via the calls and via phone. And one of them is, of course, reproduction. Unfortunately, women are taken in a sense of reproducing as I think it's a very machine-like concept. I do not appreciate it, and my husband doesn't appreciate it either. And they're learning, and that's a good thing. I appreciate that they're not pressuring us anymore. In the beginning, there was a lot of
So do they ask this? Do they ask these questions?
they do ask my husband, and then he filters it out to me, which is a good thing. But yes, there was a certain expect. Even when I was coming to London, they were a bit sad because they thought the good news was actually not me moving to London and getting a scholarship, but the good news was something different. So there are certain expectations in terms of
Wow.
that. But apart from that, I think expectation to, for instance, learn Mandarin, expectation to spend time with them, expectation to go to China frequently. At times, it's difficult for us because my husband has his job, and then I'm here as well. But luckily, my husband is balancing it very well. He's balancing his family and me very well. And I want him to balance that. I do not interfere in him balancing it either. He knows who I am, he knows who his parents are. So he's trying to balance it out. And I think it's very important
Right.
for a man to balance his wife and his family, and for a woman to balance her husband or her partner and her family as well. So
Yeah.
he's balancing it very well, and he filters out a lot of things, which I'm thankful to him for. And he filters out a lot of things towards my parents-in-law as well, which I'm sure they would appreciate too. But I try my best to go out of the way to respect them because they gave birth to my husband. They, grew him up. They give him a lot of amenities as a child. They gave him a very good education. They gave him a lot of ideals. They made him a decent, good man, and I'm very
Yeah. Just
thankful.
the fact that they're parents and they're his family, right? I mean,
Yes.
you can. I've realized in life that you can have any amount of differences with your parents, but if your partner doesn't respect them, it could really hurt you.
Yes.
And if your partner respects them, despite knowing all the differences that you have with your parents,
Hmm.
I think you would respect your partner much more.
Yes. Yes.
And this is a lived experience of mine.
Hmm.
Like, I tell Christoph everything, like, this happened and this happened, but he never stops respecting them.
Hmm.
And he never loses sight of like the big picture.
Hmm.
Even if we like have small differences, of
Hmm.
course he's very vocal. Like, if he doesn't agree, he says it. He's like, of course, you're completely in the right to feel how you feel.
Hmm.
But he never loses sight of the big picture, because he always says to me that in order for us to be happy, you need peace with your family.
Hmm. Yes.
And he's not thinking about this year, next 5 years. He's thinking about the next 40 years. And he always, like, I learned this from him actually, that how much we underestimate peace
Hmm.
with our family. And I think that this is a really good thing,
Hmm.
to respect your partner's parents, even if you objectively don't think that they're the best people or the best example to follow. You know what I mean? And you don't have to. Like, you can just respect someone without having the closest relationship with them.
Hmm.
And that's also okay.
Yes.
And I think being in a relationship teaches you this kind of resilience.
Hmm. It does.
And it taught me this kind of resilience as well, that you will not agree on everything, but you can still respect people.
Yes. Honestly, Kakab, I believe respect is something very paramount in everyone's life. You have a lot of self respect. Everybody has a certain self respect. I personally believe respect comes by default. You don't know a person, you give them respect. If they do something that takes away the respect, that's different. But if they continue doing certain actions, or they do not offend you in certain ways, you continue giving them respect. You sometimes enhance the respect. But I think respect is by default. It should be by default, unless they persuade you
Yeah.
to take away that respect that you're giving them.
Yeah.
But honestly, also, I think respect is more important than love. When I was deciding on if I should marry my husband or not, the first thing I looked at was if he's respectful towards me. And the first thing that I looked towards myself was if I was respectful towards him, if I could accept his flaws, and still respect him, and if he could accept my flaws and still respect me. So before I
Right.
fell in love with my husband, which came at a lot later stage, I fell in love with the
Really?
fact, yes, I fell in love with the fact that he respected me and he was putting in effort and I was respecting him. So I make it a point that I go out of my way to respect his parents. I go out of my way to respect his sister.
Yeah.
And I go out of my way to ensure that they feel respected. Because whatever the case is, at the end, his parents will always remember the way I made them feel. And if I make them feel that they're respected, and if they make me feel
Yeah.
that I'm respected, then there will always be a mutual cooperation among ourselves.
So, you said something really interesting that you fell in love with him much later and you
Hmm.
started respecting him or appreciating that he respected you
Hmm.
a lot sooner. And this is so interesting that you say that because I feel like when you start dating someone, the butterflies and all of these things are so front and center that actually assessing what kind of a person you're with comes at a very later stage for a lot of people. You know what I mean? And
Honestly,
a
that's,
lot
I
of
think, where we
times,
go wrong.
yeah, I know. And I feel like, of course, I mean, sometimes, like for with me, my radar was so sharp that I could never love someone who was not a good human being. So it was like my brain was doing the work as my heart was feeling attracted, right? And I feel like it's possible that you can lose sight of one thing for the other. But the way you put it, this is so unconventional, and this is also so good that it's. I mean, it kind of gives me this feeling that you don't have to fall in love at first sight. Like you can, like love can grow and it can develop, and it can definitely, come later, and that's good. Like a lot of young people, this is like really good advice.
I think I wish I gave myself that advice, Kaka, when I was younger. This is a learned experience. It comes with practice. It comes with your experience. It comes with other people's experience. It comes with maturity as well. Since I was 28 when I met my husband, almost at the end of 28,
Me
I
too.
was a lot more emotionally mature than maybe when I was 22 or 21 or 20. I used to hate men when I was 22. I hated romance novels. I hated
Me
romantic
too.
movies. I was like, I thought I was asexual, honestly. But then
Yeah,
turned out
me
I
too.
wasn't.
Oh my god, me too. I thought that
Yeah,
there's something like there's a glitch in the matrix.
exactly.
Why am I
Exactly.
meeting all the horrible men in the world? Like, what's going on here?
And it wasn't just about meeting horrible men. I had some amazing men around me. Like some Pakistani men that I've met, some people from abroad that I've met, they were all amazing as well. It was just that I could not feel attracted to anyone. And I talked to my mom actually. I talked to my mom very openly about it. And I told her, Mom, I think I'm asexual. And I think I don't have the capability of liking a man ever. And she was like, It's okay. I thought that too when I was younger. And I was like, Wow, okay, that's cool. My mom is like, going to touch her 70s and she's still so cool about it. I loved it. But the fact is that I did end up realizing that I'm not asexual. I do have certain feelings. I have humanly needs, emotionally, physically, probably as well, which came a lot later. But the fact remains that my husband, when I met him, I already knew that I would apply logic because it's a lifelong decision, Kakab. It's not a small decision. It's a
Yeah,
decision if you are sure that unless there's something very big that happens that leads towards a separation, God forbid, of course. But if something happens like that, that's a different story. But the first primary concern for me was that I would appreciate and I would rather have a person for the rest of my life. I would rather grow old with somebody. And for that, I had to take a very calculated, very logical decision rather than listening to my heart. Because if I take an impulsive decision, it might work not in my favor. It would just work against me. So when I met my husband, I first looked at all the compatibilities that we have. I looked at him, his personality. I looked at him being ambitious. I looked at him being hardworking. And even though he comes from a very different background from I do, and his parents built him in a way, and the fact that he's very self-made, I learned to appreciate him even more. The fact that he was still taking care of his parents, and after being self-made, after struggling so much, after working so hard, it made me appreciate him more, it made me respect him
Right.
more, it made me realize that he does put an effort into what he realizes and decides he wants to put an effort in. And for me, that was a big thing. Many people said that, oh, Tayyaba, you're a news presenter, you could have had anyone. And to be very honest, I got a lot of offers, sugar daddy offers too, if I could say that, from very notable people that many
I'm
people
not
would be aware
surprised.
of. That's very common in Pakistan. Not just Pakistan, everywhere, I think.
Everywhere, everywhere. But I can totally understand like how it happens in Pakistan. The more
Yes,
patriarchal the society, the more toxic the way things happen. So
exactly. But even though I did have offers from some very wealthy, filthy rich sort of people, I knew that I have to work with my brain and my logic. And for me, mental peace and peace at heart is more important. For me, morals are very important. So, morals and everything come first. Honesty comes first. And my husband gave me that. He gave me the honesty that I wanted. And that's when I realized, okay, I'm going to allow myself to let go. I'm going to allow myself
right,
to feel. And that's when
right.
I started. I did feel butterfly when he cut his hair. The first time he had really long hair, I did not feel a single butterfly cock up. But the next time we met, I did get a lot of butterflies, but I contained myself. I told myself, no, I do not know if he will convert into Islam. I do not want to waste his time. I do not want to waste my time. And I was very
Yeah,
well aware and self-aware, I think, in
yeah.
this aspect, because I
That
did have a bad experience previously, and I knew that I cannot allow myself to, you know, be at the same position again and again and let my heart take
yeah,
decisions which are supposed to be taken from the brain. And
brain.
that I'm
Yeah,
glad that worked in my favor, and I'm very happy with
yeah,
it. And then it's a challenge every day. You have to build connection. You have to and stay committed,
yeah. You
because
have to
I'm
work at it.
now, exactly, I'm now in London, Kakab. He's in Turkey. Yes, we're 4 hours apart, but we do not meet for months. And the fact remains that you have to decide to stay with a person. You can find better options, amazing
Yeah, no,
options.
no,
You have
absolutely. I think companionship is a decision. Love is a decision.
you
Marriage is a
always find
decision.
options. You always have options, especially when you're at the low point in your life. Sometimes when you have fights, you will end up seeing other people. You might, but you have to take a decision that no, I will not do that. I cannot disrespect the other person who is
Yeah,
taking care of me, who has decided to let go of so many things for me. And I will not allow that person to take my self respect as well. So that's why I think
right,
self respect is the most important. And my husband and I decided that of course, he has so many colleagues around him. Turkish women are very beautiful too, but I'm not insecure because I trust him and I know that he will not do anything which will hurt me. And even if he
right.
does, then that's God's plan. And for me, I also know that I will not do anything that will hurt him, and I will never allow myself. It's my decision, it's my responsibility.
Yeah, yeah,
So I
yeah.
think the couple has to take a responsibility.
What was the conversion thing like? How did he convert? And, what was the long and short of it?
Okay, so the conversion was sort of simple. I did not expect it to be this simple. I thought it would be harder, but it wasn't. And I'm so thankful to Allah Ta'ala, to him, especially to, my husband, that he just accepted everything. So it was very easy. He talked to his parents. They said, it's your decision. He started reading up on the aspects of Quran. I told him to take it slow. I do not interfere. I did not want to direct him and to drive him. I did pray with him on video call once or twice, even though I don't pray much, but I still ended up praying with him. So he understands what they are. He still, goes to Friday prayer every time, but he still
Wow.
has to learn a lot of surahs, a lot of chapters that we recite every day in the namaz, for instance, and that's okay. And he doesn't fast the entire month, and that's okay. But he did wake me up every single day when we were together this Ramzan. If I don't wake up, Kakab, I would rather sleep and stay empty, stomached and fast just without eating. But he would wake me up and make sehri sometimes for us. Sometimes he'd wake me up and then I'd make sehri. But the conversion was fairly easy. We just ended up going to, he read a bit about it himself. He got the English translation of the Quran. He started reading up on it. He learned Surah Ikhlas, which is very small, so it's fairly easy. And then we just went to the masjid. He took the Shahada and we signed some documents. There was a certificate that had to be signed. My dad arranged that for us, and that's it. Voila,
Where
he
did
was
this happen? Did this happen in Turkey or did this happen in Pakistan?
in Pakistan.
Right. Interesting. And he converted, and how long after he converted did you guys get married?
We got married 2 months later.
And how was the wedding? How are the weddings different? Like you told me that you also had a Chinese wedding. So
I
did that
did.
take place in China? And what was that experience like?
We had a Pakistani wedding where his parents and his family came. We had a Chinese wedding, which was very different. I thought Pakistani weddings were very traditional. They had a lot of rituals, but gosh, no, Chinese weddings had so many rituals. We had to do so many things, take part in so many activities. Sometimes there were certain activities which I was not comfortable in taking part in. And my parents also went to China with me. There were certain activities that were very interesting and I loved them. And a lot of traditions, the tea ceremony, calling, each other's parents, father and mother out loud. And the louder you say it, the more money they will give you. It's called the red
Wow.
package. Yeah, I got a lot of money because I shouted at the
What
top
is
of
it
my
called?
lungs. I'm sorry?
What is it called?
It's called a tea ceremony.
Is it like several days long, the Chinese wedding, or and does this tea ceremony happen after the wedding or before the wedding?
It happens during the wedding. It's just a day long. That's it. And it usually happens in the morning. So there is a ceremony in the morning, and that's all rituals. And then later there is a dinner, and then you go everywhere. And since this was a halal Muslim wedding, so they usually drink alcohol. So instead of that, we drank Sprite and Pepsi. At that time, when there was not an invasion by Israel on Palestine. So we were still drinking Sprite and Pepsi. So we drank that and we would cheers, we would go to everyone, we would fill up their cup, and then they would say a few things. So every table we would go to, the newlywed couple with the parents, and we would pour it in everyone and everyone's cup, everyone's little glass, and then we would drink it. So that was very interesting. I liked it. Before that, the rituals were very interesting as well. Then we, ring ceremony, the tea ceremony, the calling each other father and mother ceremony. There were so many ceremonies. It was just very
How many
interesting.
hours? How many hours is the wedding? Does the wedding last?
It started at 10, ended at 12:30, and then I went and changed into other clothes, much easier clothes, and had a new hairdo and new makeup and like everything brand new. And it was an entirely different, dress and everything. And then we went for going to every table while they were having lunch. So
Right.
basically, we didn't have lunch, but everybody was having lunch. And we were just there to greet them and to welcome them and to introduce me to everyone, basically.
Right. Interesting. You said there were some things you weren't comfortable with.
Hmm.
What were they like, if you
Yeah.
want to talk about them?
There were certain, rituals, for instance, that I did not want to do. For instance, in Islam, we're not allowed to bow in front of everyone, anyone, basically, apart from God. And in their culture, in East Asian culture, in Chinese, Korean, Japanese culture, there's a lot of bowing involved towards your older people, elders, towards your teachers, anybody you
Like
respect, even towards your
completely
peers.
bowing like in entirety.
Yeah, so bowing, like there are different types of bowing. They mostly bow like just standing and bowing. Then sometimes a sit and bow too. So there are like different types of bowing, but I was not comfortable with, sitting and bowing. Initially, my parents and I were a little surprised when we had a rehearsal ceremony a day before. So when we found out that we had to do this, we were a bit surprised. I didn't want to say anything because it was a new marriage. It was, I had met his parents. This was the second time I was meeting, third time I was meeting his parents. And we didn't know each other very well either. They did not understand my language. I couldn't explain it to them. I was very, very careful how to approach this, but I was not comfortable doing that. But then I talked to my husband, and luckily he said, "Oh, that's not a big deal. That's okay. We can do it another way." And I was like, "Wow, I did not know it was that simple." It's just because I was not willing to communicate. I thought it would be harder, but after the conversation, it was just much easier. So we ended up not doing that, and we ended up, twisting the ceremony a bit, and that was great. It worked out for both of us.
Did you in particular face anything which was some form of a cultural or religious backlash? Like getting married in Pakistan is also, it comes with its territory, right? Like a lot of people are like, well, why do you not have a Muslim name? Or in my case, like I was not able to find someone who would be able to officiate the marriage, the nikah, in English, for example. Like, these things happen. And did you face some sort of backlash at the wedding in Pakistan?
That's actually very interesting that you want somebody to officiate your marriage in English, because this is not something I thought about. And honestly, thank you for bringing this up, because my husband, we did not have a nikah Juan who spoke in English. He spoke in Urdu. He was trying his best. His English wasn't really good. He was trying, but he spoke majority in Urdu, and my dad was translating for my husband. Okay, so there were certain expectations. I had my nikah a lot before I had my wedding. On the wedding day in itself, the Pakistani wedding, the one with that went on for full swing, and his parents were there too. His entire family was there. That was great. We had, we danced, we enjoyed, we did some ceremonies, Pakistani ceremonies like Doodh Pilai, etc. They all enjoyed it a lot. So that was not a problem. That was pretty good. But during the nikah, so interestingly, the person who officiated our marriage did not have any problem with my husband having a Muslim name or not, because he was thankfully educated enough to realize that there's no such thing as Muslim name, like unless it's actually from the Quran itself or it's actually something very, very Islamic. There are so many Arab names which aren't Muslim names, they're just Arab names. My mom has a Persian name. So many people have Arab names, not Muslim name. Like Umar, it's an Arab name. It's not a Muslim name per se. So even Ali is an Arabic name. It's not a Muslim name. Then it became, identified as a Muslim name because it became very important. Ali was a very important
Yeah,
figure.
names are basically derived from culture.
Exactly. It's not exactly,
Yeah.
unless it's from the Quran in itself and you pick it up, with the intention. But having said that, I told everyone that I am not going to change my husband's name. I'm not going to take his identity away from him. His name is perfectly great. He does not need a Muslim name. He did not want to change his name either, of course. Why would he? And I've never let him, I never allowed anybody to ask him that. And even if people did, he just said, no, I won't. And I was very proud of him for saying no directly. Many people, many relatives of mine also asked me, and I said, that's not important. I told my parents, and they were like explaining to everybody that why are you thinking in such a primitive way? But
Wow.
honestly, yeah, my parents were very, very. At first, my mom, I think, did bring this up, but I told her that, Mom, your name is a Persian name. And, it was like a fire worshiper's name, actually.
It's great that your parents actually took the feedback into stock,
Yeah,
because this is not very common that you give someone like South Asian parents, you tell them something and they understand.
yeah.
That's already rare.
Yeah, it is. It is. But the thing is, I think it's also important for the parents to, for you to make your parents understand and to tell them that let's not be rigid here. And at times I would have fights too with my parents. It's not like, they would understand everything. And sometimes what they're trying to tell me, I would understand everything. We had fights too, but luckily not in my marriage situation. In other concepts, there are a lot of concepts that I told my dad were not right, and at first we had a fight, and then he was like, no, wait, you're right. That's very misogynistic. And I didn't realize I was doing it. And there were a lot of conversations, and at times he told me certain things, and then we would have a fight, and then I would realize, oh wait, what I was doing was wrong too. So we did have fights, but luckily not in the marriage situation a lot. Maybe apart
Right.
from the fact that there was a bit of conversation regarding Rukhsati, which is not an Islamic
Yeah.
concept at all.
I had to explain the concept of Rukhsati, like for people who don't speak Urdu, this is like when you leave your parents' house officially and are sent off to your husband's house. Or it's interesting you mentioned that, because I had to kind of take Christoph through this whole concept. And
How did he take
I
it?
realized, I mean, I think he understood that, because in Christian weddings also the couple leaves together at the
Hmm.
end. So he understood that. But I mean, a lot of times in Christian weddings, people are already living together before they get married. So I had to kind of explain to him that, look, you have to be very prepared for this moment. There's going to be a lot of pictures, and the photographers are always ready to, capture these moments. A lot of people cry. Imagine if I was living with my parents, this would essentially be the last day that I would
Hmm.
live with them. So he understood that, but I felt like I had to tell him,
Hmm.
that it's just not the signing ceremony. It's also like something at the end of the event, which in a lot of families and in a lot of parents' minds, this is the real wedding. A lot of people don't consider Nikah the real wedding, like the signing the real wedding. They consider like sending off your daughter to somebody else's home. Um, that to be the real wedding. He took it fine, but we had like a little simulation. We created a little simulation, and I was like, okay, when if you're sitting here and if you're sitting here, like this is like, it was really interesting.
Ah,
But I had to explain it like through a simulation. And
I love that. I love how you're making sure that he understands everything. That's great.
yeah, I mean, honestly, in the beginning, I didn't realize that, but I think when you're marrying someone from a different culture, you have to explain everything, like
Yes.
everything. Like you have to explain everything, because like I was having a conversation with my mom, and my mom was like, have you already told him that in our culture we don't people don't kiss the bride? And I was like, I think he knows that.
Oh my God,
And then I
yeah.
and then I told him, and he was like, even after the marriage you can't kiss the
Yeah.
bride? And I was like, yeah, this is not the culture. And I realized, I mean, it's a lot of things are still very censored in
Mm,
like Muslim culture. Even if
mm,
you're married, like being married does not really mean that you publicly do a lot of things that would be acceptable otherwise.
yeah.
And I feel like marrying someone from a different culture like means you tell them every single thing, like
Mm,
even the things that you think are not necessary for you, because like it's so second nature to us, right? We've registered like all of these small things, but someone from a different culture just has to be taken through these tiny shreds of information.
we
And
think it's
yeah, there's a
common
lot, like,
sense. And the fact
I
is that
know, right? We
common
just think
sense
it's
is,
common sense.
yeah, and common sense is very relative to different cultures. Like it's different in every country, and we don't realize that. We
Exactly.
think common sense is universal.
No, I've realized that it's just a matter of culture.
Yes.
Like, for example, small things like in Pakistani weddings, we don't have the concept of a cake.
Yeah.
But I told him that a lot of people are starting to introduce that. Like, a lot
Mm,
of people are starting to get cakes on the wedding. And we decided, okay, well, we want a wedding cake because this is such a big thing in Europe.
yeah.
So even though it's a Pakistani wedding, I mean, we will have a European wedding at some point, but
Mm,
in like, because now we're preparing for a Pakistani wedding, we're like, okay, well, even if it's not a thing in Pakistan, let's have a cake, because we want to meet each other halfway. I want to
mm,
do something also like for the guests and for the people who will be coming from Europe, that it's something familiar, and
mm.
just to give them a feeling that we take your culture into consideration as well, because I think honestly everybody is a bit touchy about their culture, and that's okay and that's fine.
Mm.
I think people are very sensitive culturally. I'm not a very culturally sensitive person, and I honestly couldn't care less about a lot of things.
Mm.
But I have understood in my life that people are sensitive and they respect it if you respect their culture, and I respect it when he
Mm.
respects my culture, even if I don't respect it myself. It's the same logic with respecting the parents.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think also in Pakistani weddings, we don't have like the concept of a wedding rehearsal. Because I
Yeah.
think
No.
when you're marrying a Pakistani person, you don't need a rehearsal. You just know
Yeah.
everything, right?
Yeah.
But I think we will have one
That's
because
a very smart thing because we did not have a rehearsal, and his parents were, because my husband already knew that we wouldn't have it, but somehow I never communicated it to his parents, and they were expecting a rehearsal. They did not know what to do, and I realized we should have had a rehearsal so they understand what to do, when to do, where to come, etc.,
right.
etc. And I also think that Pakistani parents don't have a lot of role on the weddings, and there should probably be more role for them because at a lot of times they're just sitting like in the front, right?
I feel like maybe on the day of the event it's a bit unexciting and
Hmm.
underwhelming, but
Hmm.
I feel like in the days that lead up to the wedding, like parents and their preferences are pretty central, I would say. I feel. Like I feel like it's gotten a bit less with time and with, modernization and globalization. But I feel like there was a time Pakistani mothers used to have an opinion on what the bride is going to wear,
Oh
what
yeah.
jewelry the bride is going to wear. I mean, I feel like this was so unnecessary. Like telling a
Yeah.
woman what to wear. Like, it's my wedding. I'm going to decide what I'm going to wear. Nobody else can decide that. And I feel like it has gone down a bit in recent years. Women are a lot more opinionated now and they can't be forced into wearing whatever the family wants. But I mean, what jewelry are you wearing? Who is buying the jewelry that you're wearing? Well, if we are buying the jewelry, you better wear that jewelry. So I feel
I
like the
get
role of
it.
parents is so central. Like, even
It's
my parents and I
leading
had
up
this
to the
discussion about the name.
about the name.
Yeah, my parents and I had this discussion as well about the name, and I was like, I'm absolutely not going to do it. And then my
Hmm.
father was like, well, what is your problem? And I was like, my problem? Are you asking me my problem? It's embarrassing. Like, it's a simple answer. Like, it's not so hard to understand that, it's embarrassing to get someone to change their name just because you have an easier time telling people, or the guests you invite have an easier time while it rolls off their tongue.
Stripping
So
away somebody's identity just to serve you.
I
It's like
know.
slavery. Somehow, I don't know why it reminded me of slavery, but it really is like slavery, taking away
It's it's
somebody's complete
it's
identity.
disrespectful. I think this
It's
is the most
very disrespectful.
disrespectful part. I mean, I would feel very uncomfortable.
I had this conversation because it's hard for them to pronounce a Pakistani name. So everyone who goes in China from all over the world ends up getting a Chinese name. And they asked if I would like a Chinese name because Tayyaba means something very different in China in Mandarin because they say like Tayyaba, 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 something like that. So it means a girl who can't speak. So they were like, "Would you
What?
like a different?" Yeah, it's a very different. It's a phrase, and it has a different meaning. So they were like, "Would you like to change your name?" And I said, "No, I would not like a Chinese name." I would just laugh and I'd say, "Oh no, I wouldn't like to change my name." And my husband said that no, she's not going to change her name. Like her name is perfectly fine. You can just you end up thinking about what it means in your language, but then you have to get used to it. You have to unlearn to relearn, I guess. But I do understand because there are a lot of cultural differences. But I think on the main day in itself, in China, I had a very different experience in terms of the involvement of the parents because the parents are very central in Chinese wedding events. You sit in front of them, you serve them tea, there are so many activities which involve and surround the parents in themselves. But in Pakistani weddings it's very different on the day of the wedding in itself. The mother is taking care of a lot of people, but they're not on the stage, or there are not a lot of rituals that direct to the parents. So that was something very interesting for them. But on Nikah in itself, we ended up sitting apart, which I did not appreciate. We were in the same hall. We could look at each other. We could see each other. And when I was signing the documents, my husband came with my father as well. He was anxious. Of course, it's a moment of extreme anxiety. I was so anxious. I was like, oh my God, I wanted to cry so much. I did not realize it would be so emotional, but it is a very emotional moment for sure. And then I wanted my sisters and my mom to be the witness. and I had fully
Oh my
arranged.
god, I know. I wanted my sister to be the witness as well. It's not
Yeah.
working.
You know what? I arranged four women. I arranged four women to be witness for two witnesses. Like you need two women to be one witness, right? So I arranged four women to be two witnesses, and at the end, the person who was officiating the marriage, he said that no, that's a different process. It'll take too long. And my dad was like, let's just make it men. Okay, let's just make it four men, Tayyaba. I was let's just make it all men. And I was like, oh no, I don't want that. And my sisters agreed with it. My mom agreed with it. At first, they were like a little hesitant, my especially mom. But I said that we can get two to sign for one. And I was fully, I almost had a fight, but I said, Tayeba, it's okay. It's all right. Because I really wanted my mom to be one of the persons who was witnessing, my sisters to be the ones who were witnessing. But it didn't work out, unfortunately. But I do know that for my kids, I will make sure that women are witnesses. I'm a witness there. Even if it means bringing two women for one witness, I will make sure that that happens.
So, the fact that you mentioned that, so I wanted my sister to be a witness, and I told her that I would like for you to be the witness, right? And also because I wanted to do something different. I wanted my sister to be the witness, like,
Yeah.
and no woman in my family has ever been a witness
Me
in a
too.
marriage, right?
Hmm.
And the fact that you say that you wanted to bring two women for one, I was already infuriated. I was like, what do you mean? Who decides this? Like,
Hmm.
this is absolutely ridiculous. And she is enough on her own, and blah, blah, all of this
Hmm.
conversation. We did, like, we had this. And my parents were like, but we have no problem. But my dad was like, you do realize nobody's going to accept this. And because he's a man, the more he said that, I was like, why are you being so misogynistic? And he's like, I'm just being realistic. Nobody will accept this. Anyway, this
I
bubble
actually
burst
want to
really
continue.
quickly.
I want to
Yeah.
actually continue on this conversation because right before, a day before my nikah, my father, he's a lawyer, so he knows the know-how of the laws. We sat down and we opened the Constitution and the Pakistan Penal Code and so many acts and whatnot, and we fully had a deep session on if it's allowed, if we can do it or not. And my dad, initially, he said it's going to be very problematic. But at the end, we figured everything out. We opened the Constitution. We opened everything. I don't remember the name of the act, the Marriage Act. I don't remember. But we
Yeah.
opened like the Pakistan Penal Code, and we opened a couple of acts as well. And we came to the conclusion that the long-term decision requires, according to Sharia law, long-term decision requires two women to sign in place of one witness, equal to one man. And I was like, I'm okay with that. It's okay, but I do want women to be represented
Yeah.
as my witnesses. But at the end, the person who was officiating our marriage didn't accept it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's also my fault because I just sat a day before rather than making sure that the person who was officiating the marriage would accept it
Yeah.
and talk him through it. I ended up not, just sitting a day before, and then I had to get my makeup done. So I reached late and it just did not happen. I'm sad about it, but that's okay. I do know in the future I'm going to make sure it happens.
Yeah. No, I mean, totally, because I would like my sister to be the witness.
Yeah.
And we've
I
gone
think you
through
can do it.
several we've gone through several hoops, just climbing here and there, and a lot of people were like, well, it's not possible, blah blah. But I think more than the law or anything else, it's just a cultural barrier that women are not witness.
Yes.
And but you know what, I had this conversation with my parents like several months ago, and I decided, okay, well, I don't want to die on this hill. If this is something that I have to fight so much for, I don't want to fight this battle, because I fought so many other battles, like about the
Yeah.
name, and like the person has to, officiate our nikah in front of each other. Because I met like people who were like, well, we need a segregated event, and I was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm not gonna sit in a I don't want to be tucked away in a corner. I don't want to
Yeah.
have that kind of nikah that used to happen like 25 years ago.
Hmm.
I don't want to have it like that. I want to have it like in front of each other or together. Or
Exactly.
like so many people want to come from Germany. Like, what about them? We absolutely cannot have segregation at the wedding. And also, like, this is so outdated, like getting a woman to sign in a different room. No offense to people
Exactly.
who prefer it that way. But I mean, it's not for me.
It's
And that's
everybody's
okay.
choice, right? It's not your
Yeah,
choice,
and
and somebody shouldn't impose that choice on you.
exactly. And I feel like meeting somebody to officiate your marriage who respects that is really important for me, because I want to respect the person officiating my marriage, and I can't respect them unless they respect me. I think a lot of stuff comes with the territory when you're marrying someone from a different culture, and also like a lot of stuff that usually comes with the territory of marrying a Pakistani person, you are free from that. So there is both sides. That's been my
Absolutely.
experience.
Honestly, I feel like we need more scholars, we need more clerics who are a lot more educated rather than misogynistic and using Islam as a tool of power. I think it's more important for them to be educated, to be more open minded, and that's not going to happen anytime soon in Pakistan, unfortunately.
Thank you for speaking with me. I know it was a lot of work to make this happen. I am
Thank you for having me.
so happy that you had it the way you did.